Welcome to Changing the Game, where bold leaders, rule breakers, and trailblazers drop the playbook and share how they lead, win, and shake things up. Hey there, it's Jordan, your host. If you've been loving the conversations on Changing the Game, I'm excited to introduce something new, the Nobody Cares Club, a show about building the life you actually want without worrying so much about what everyone else thinks. We're talking confidence, wellness, identity, relationships, and the reminder that nobody is thinking about you as much as you think they are. And that's the best news you'll ever hear. So stop waiting, stop overthinking, and get ready to be inspired to go after your dreams. Search Nobody Cares Club wherever you listen, launching summer 2026. Welcome back to the show. Today, I'm joined by Kristin Belleson. Kristin is a former swimmer at the University of Iowa, go Hawkeyes, and now the CEO of the National Eczema Association. After competing in an individual sport that demanded discipline, ownership, and adaptability, she's built a career leading mission-driven teams in the healthcare space. We talk about what it really feels like to step away from sport, how to navigate those first few years after athletics, and what it means to lead high performers in environments that don't always operate in the same way. Excited for you to hear her perspective on her story. Welcome, Kristin.
Hi, Jordan. Great to meet you and great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for taking time out of your time in sunny Florida to join us.
Okay. So. Yes, it's good. It's good. We fit you in, and very excited to talk with you. This is something that's really important to me, and I always like to connect with other female athletes. So I'm glad to be here.
I love it. I love it. I'm so excited for the listeners to hear your story too, because you have an awesome career. You're a former D1 athlete. You're CEO, which is just, it's all amazing. So I'd love if you could kind of pave the way for our listeners today. Tell us a little bit about your background at Iowa. How did you get into swimming?
Of course. Interesting, or not even interesting. I think a lot of swimmers fall into this. Is I started swimming at the Y when I was 7 years old, and I was in swimming lessons. And the instructor came up to my mom and said, I think your daughter has a little bit of a knack for swimming. And my mom's like, okay. And she put me on the swim team, and it kind of stuck then. But I was one of those individuals that, at least until like I was 14 or so, always did different sports. So I think it's really important that, I think a lot of current individuals in the sports medicine and sports science space say this, but diversification at a young age is good. So I did basketball and cheerleading and softball. So it wasn't until I was like 8th grade freshman year that I really started to focus on swimming. And I really found a passion for it, found a passion in friends, great individuals that I'm still friends with today, 35, 40 years later. So it stuck with me and continued through high school. Wanted to definitely, I'm from Chicago originally, so the Big Ten means a lot to me. It's very different now. The Big Ten is now the West Coast and the East Coast. So the Big Ten is definitely different than what it was in the 80s and 90s, but wanted to stick with a Big Ten school. And so I looked at Michigan State, Indiana, Iowa, and Iowa really had my heart when I went there, and really loved the team and loved the campus and loved the university and loved the opportunity for academics. And so that was the path I took.
That's awesome. I know we have a little bit of, I didn't go to Iowa, but my sister's an Iowa alum.
Yes.
Yes.
You have some of the Hawkeye blood in you.
Yes, have to. Yeah, she played volleyball there. And it's funny that you say like it's changed so much, because it really, really has. She actually played at UCLA for 2 years when they were still in the Pac-12. Then she went to Iowa, and then they became the Big Ten. So
now she's playing against or competing against maybe some former teammates and things, which is cool.
Yeah. It's so interesting how things have changed.
Sorry. And I think it's really good for the Big Ten. I think that West Coast exposure is great. I think some traditionalist Big Ten people like me, that it was originally Midwest kind of focus, had a hard time, but I think it's great. And I think it gives visibility all over the country for a really fantastic division.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I remember you mentioned that you started swimming at the Y. I feel like that's so many kids' like first experience being thrown in a pool is like lessons or just go, hey, we're gonna put you in some community activities. And one of your first jobs was with the Y, wasn't it?
You're exactly right. So interestingly enough, I did a quick stint in sports marketing right out of college. And my family had some involvement with the Y. I obviously had a passion for it because I started swimming there and took on a marketing and membership role. And so had the opportunity. I was there for almost 7 years and really got to understand not for profit and volunteer engagement and understand mission driven organizations at the Y. And it became a passion for me to work for an organization that had a very deliberate mission. So my time at the Y was very instrumental in understanding where I wanted to go next in my career. I didn't realize it then, just like everyone, right? You kind of fall into things. But I felt passionate about their mission, and there was, a lane that was more marketing, membership, business related. So I went down that pathway. But yeah, it was a tremendous experience. And as I said, you learn a little bit more about like what you're passionate about. And I knew I liked mission driven organizations. So it was a good exposure to later on in my career. I didn't realize it at the time, of course.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how the pieces do start to come together later in your career. It's not necessarily like at least my experience was like I'm out of college or I'm fresh out of my degree, like I just need a job and I
Yes.
need to figure out what to do.
And I do think, there are certain things that lead you there. And when you look back and you're 51, like I am, or about to be 51, I think you realize there were decisions that were intentional. You didn't realize it at the time, but then as you're continuing on in your career or in your life or whatever it may be, you're like, okay, that was a good decision, and I made the right call. But sometimes it's just trial and error, and that one worked out well, so it was good.
Yeah, it definitely started your career path probably off on the right foot. That's amazing.
Absolutely,
Before we get too
absolutely,
into your career too, I want to learn just a little bit more about your swimming career because
of
swimming
course.
is very foreign to me. I mean, the only time I really get exposure to it is when I see it on the Olympics or the Olympic trials. So, which you're probably familiar with people saying that. So, it's an individual sport, right? Like, or do you consider it more of a team environment?
No, I think it's interesting. I think it's one of those sports similar to like a golf or track, where you have an opportunity to compete at an individual level, but you are part of a team and you're training as part of a team. But I think the thing with swimming that is a little bit different than other sports, maybe like a basketball or a volleyball, is you have the ability to control your own destiny. So sometimes in other sports, it's definitely like a team mentality. And if everyone plays well, you're going to win or you're going to be successful. In swimming, you could have a really good meet, but the team doesn't. And so that's where it's a little bit of a different sport in that respect. And I think that's one of the things when you and I initially talked is that was a bit of an adjustment for me when I got into my career, is used to being able to control my own destiny, right? Like I had the ability to say, I'm going to work my tail off. I'm going to train really hard, and X, X, and X will happen. When you get into a career and a work environment, sometimes you can work your butt off, and there's still something that doesn't pan out the way you need it to because of external environments and markets and everything that that plays into it. But I was very attracted to swimming because I was able to swim and train with friends and peers and people that I really admired and looked up to. But at the same time, I had the ability to work as hard as I wanted to develop myself and get better.
Yeah, I was that a transition for you when you were leaving swimming then? I mean, you said you did struggle earlier in your career, maybe with a little bit of that. When did you know like, okay, I have to maybe start focusing on career goals after this? Or were you just like, so focused in your lane before
Yeah,
then?
I think like many athletes, and especially individuals that competed at a high level, I think there is something in us that is always burning, and I don't think it ever goes away. Right? I think we always strive for excellence. But I'm very open and honest. I think a lot of athletes, when they're done, especially in Olympic type sports, which is swimming, gymnastics, right? That you're not going to go to a pro level, or you're not going to have the ability to compete at the next level. There's definitely a bit of transition. Like I had used to train 5 or 6 hours a day. And by the time you're commuting there and going to practice and everything else, it's, like I said, about 6 hours. And then literally one day, like I remember it was February of 1997. I was at Big Tens, ironically in Indianapolis, which is where I live now. It was my last swim meet. And you are like, okay, now what? And you go back to school on Monday, you go back to campus. And I think for a lot of athletes, specifically ones that, like I said, don't go to the next step and that are in sports that are more like Olympic based sports, it's a transition. Like, what do I do at that time? And also, I think we can all attest to, it really is part of our identity, right? Like I still run into people today. They're like, oh, you were the swimmer. Oh yeah, you were a swimmer, like, so I think it was part of your identity, and then it stops being part of your identity. And I think we all want to find something else that is our identity. And it's something I think many athletes face. I think female athletes may face it more just based on the nature of who we are.
Yeah.
But it was definitely hard. I went through a transition, and now looking back, I was like, oh, I probably was slightly depressed or had a little bit of anxiety and didn't know it, right? Like it was the late 90s and people weren't talking as much about mental health. So looking back, it was definitely an adjustment. And I think it's one thing that I think universities really strive to do it, but I think it's lost when they're trying to focus on all these other things. Is okay, in 6 months for the seniors, you're going to be done. What are you going to do next? And I think the University of Iowa did a fantastic job of preparing us for life after sport. But I think there's still an opportunity to have a little bit more deliberate conversations and connect maybe some of those athletes with other individuals in a career setting. So I think it's definitely a work in progress, and I'm sure some people do it better than others.
I totally agree, Kristen. I had the same experience when I was transitioning out. And like you, I knew that I wasn't going to go play pro or go play
Yes.
overseas or whatever it is. But I don't think we're still prepared for as big of an identity shift as it is, even though people are saying, like, hey, your career's going to end, you're going to be done soon, it goes by fast, but you really don't know until you're in that position.
Absolutely. And I don't think you realize how much you identified with your sport until after the fact. And I think that's actually one of the really positive things from being an athlete is I didn't realize when I graduated and starting interviewing, and I'd be like, oh, I was a swimmer in college, and people are like, oh, what? And you don't realize that when individuals are looking to hire people or when they're looking for potential candidates for a role, that's a really good quality. And so it's something like that's in the back of our head, or just something we did, and it shaped a lot of who we are and what we do. So removing yourself from something that you're so passionate about and trying to find other things, I think is definitely an adjustment. I would say probably 90% of people go through when they're done. At least that would be my guess.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's nice to know that we're not alone too, even though it feels like such an isolating time when you're going through it. Like you feel like you're the only one in it.
You totally do. Yeah. And I think it's also especially for individuals that are driven. And for me, a family wasn't children and a family were not in my line of sight. I just wasn't interested in
Yeah.
having kids really early on. That my career really became kind of what I was passionate about. But it's also important to remember, like, work is very different than a sport, and you have to have some boundaries. So that's always something I'm constantly working on. But yeah, you find yourself putting or investing your extra time into other things, and hopefully they're positive and good things.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a transition.
Definitely. I think athletes, we do tend to throw ourselves into a new identity. Like I totally relate to that. Like work becomes your new hat that you put on and you're like, this is what I do. This is who I am. I'm this. And that can be actually be not very healthy too. It can
Yeah,
have
and it's Absolutely. And I think it's one of the things that has been, one of the most important things that I've learned later in my career. I didn't realize it at the time when I was an individual contributor and maybe not leading teams, but that not everyone operates at the same level of intensity that I do or we do. And it is adapting that when you're in a work environment, in a career, and especially in a role where you're in an organization or a company or a corporate environment where there's a lot of people at play. You have to adapt that not everyone is working at the same level of intensity that you are, and that's been an adjustment for me. And there's one thing, my mom shared with me very early on. She's like, there are sergeants and there are generals and there are soldiers. And it really stuck with me because I think sometimes as athletes, we expect everyone to operate at the same level of intensity. And it doesn't mean that they're not doing what they need to do to be successful, or they're not carrying weight in an organization the way they should. And that's been something I've had to adapt to sort of later in my career. Like, okay, Kristin, you can't expect everyone to operate at that level. They're operating at the level that feels good for them, and that's fantastic. But people's level of intensity is different, and that shifts a bit. I think, and you can attest to this too, is especially when you're in a team and you're in a Division I environment, most of you are usually like on the same playing field and have that structure and that determination and that perseverance. And I think that's what makes us great at what we did. But when you get in a work or career environment, it's adapting and it's different. People operate at different speeds, and it's a little bit of a shift. And I think something you don't realize you have to adapt to until you're actually in it.
Yeah, definitely one thing you probably have to learn on the fly. I think I had a similar experience in my just lifetime, not necessarily maybe with career, but just realizing that, oh, not everyone's been training at the same capacity, or, oh, not everyone's been throwing themselves into doing this one thing for so long. It totally is an adjustment period. And I think it's probably taken me, I don't know, 10 years into my career now to get there too, and realize that.
Well, and I'll give you a little bit of credit. I'm sure not everyone within your environment now is doing a podcast on the side, right? Or involved in this amazing network that we met through. And I think that those are some things that I think that's where it does differentiate you, and you're able to focus on things that you're still passionate about and grow in other ways. So I think we kind of usually take on some outside things that are important to us too.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it is important for me to have those outside things because, like we talked about earlier, my identity will become the one thing I'm doing unless I'm following a passion or something else on the side. So I'm with you there. Like, you kind of still have to feed that like desire to compete or do something.
Absolutely.
Like, otherwise it's just kind of gets all consuming.
Absolutely. And I know like a lot of swimmers get into triathlons, and I went through that. Or, I think we're all very interested in still being physically active and working out. And so I think that's ingrained in us, which is fantastic. But I think some people compete at a master's level or do some of those things, which are great. I think some people throw themselves into their career. And so, yeah, you're right. I think it's just finding what you feel good about.
Yeah. And I think you've done some really cool things in your career too, because you have that competitive side, you've learned so much, but you also found a great lane where you are working in mission-driven organizations. Like you said, like you really align with the mission. And I think that's important for a lot of people.
Yes.
Is that like when you got that first taste of that at the Y, was that really where you were like, I want to work in healthcare because it's mission-driven? Or how did you find yourself in that vertical, I guess?
That's a really good question. And I think one of the things I was very interested in working for an organization that had a mission and something bigger than I was. Interesting. I was offered how old was I? Maybe 26 or 27 years old. And I was interviewing for two different roles. One was in pharmaceutical sales, completely different. And one was with the Y. And I had to make a decision between the two. And I went with the why. And interestingly enough, that company went public, and there were a lot of really cool things that happened within that pharmaceutical space. And I'm like, gosh, what if I would have went down that pathway? I don't think I would have had the same career trajectory if I chose that way, right? I think that some of the things that I learned through athletics absolutely made the leader who I am today. And I don't know if I would have had that same leadership opportunity in the other space, but I also think I do believe in working for an organization that is doing something different than, I give credit where credit is due. People that are very focused on revenue and stocks and everything. And we are too within the not-for-profit space, but in a different way. And so I think that's really something important to consider. And for me, when I started at the Y, like I said, there was something about helping people in my local community and other communities that felt good, and was still very passionate within the healthcare space. So kind of continued down that path of healthcare association work.
Yeah. I think everything does happen for a reason.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Trust me, a few times I'm like, well, I could have went in that route and I would have had a very different, but I'm very, I think everything worked out the way that it should.
Yeah. Your story just reminded me of a friend that works totally different environment, but she used to work at a startup company that had a huge, they blew up. They're in the alcohol space. So totally different than what you're doing. But she will sometimes be like, man, could you imagine if I would have stayed on at that company, like the equity that I would have? But she's like, I would never have the opportunities to do what I'm doing now. And she works for this like kick-ass ski company now. So anyway, it just reminded me.
She's loving, and I'm sure she's loving it. And I will probably tell her she's in the right place. I think that's for sure.
Yes.
Like it happens that way.
Absolutely. And did you always know that you wanted to be a CEO? Like, were you one of those women that was like, I'm going to be a CEO someday? Or how did that happen?
You know what? I think I started to think that around like my early 30s. I was like, okay, I think that's what I wanted to do. I always had a very, very deep passion for being a leader in an organization. And I think I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I do think in my early 30s, I was like, yeah, I want to be a CEO. Like that's what I want to do. And it's not without a lot of challenges. I think a lot of people, I always say this, depending on where you are in your career, it's very easy to point fingers and be critical of individuals in different roles, whether they're above you or your peer or another individual, that may be doing something different. I think one of the things I've learned is you don't know what someone experiences until you're in that position. And I always like to say, like, unless you live in a glass house, you really shouldn't, or a concrete house, you really shouldn't throw rocks, because I think a lot of times the more elevated you are in your career, the responsibility changes. And until you're in that, you don't realize it. And I look back at some CEOs that I've worked for, and I was like, wow, I didn't even know they were I didn't even know they were going through that at that time. And so I think it's something that we constantly have to remind ourselves is like everyone's situation is slightly different, and it's no different than when you're in a CEO or a vice president or a chief role, that everyone is dealing with different things. And it's not minimizing what people that are individual contributors are doing. But I think it's really important to remind us, like, we all have different things we're dealing with. And until you're in that, it's hard to feel or understand that fully.
I think that's great advice, because you can find yourselves in a lot of roles where you're questioning maybe what leadership is doing, or you're like, why did they do this? Like, this doesn't make sense to me. And I just really think you can learn from anybody in those situations. Like, even if you learn maybe what you don't want to, how you don't want to handle something going forward in the future, like if you're ever in that position, then it's just all experience.
No, you are absolutely right. I think a lot of times I would be like, why are they doing this or why are they doing that? And you may not see the big picture. And I like to say, at least when I'm meeting with my team, sometimes I'm like, I promise there's a method behind the madness, right? Like, and not that I don't like to create madness or chaos, but when decisions are made, and then after the fact, and you can't share that then, right? But after the fact, it was like, okay, that's why I made that decision, or that's why we went that down that route, or that's why we chose that strategy. And I think it's about having awareness and empathy as well, right? Like being compassionate that different people are dealing with different things. And I also think I learned something probably in the middle of my career is someone said something to me once, and it was a very, very smart individual and a CEO that I reported to. And she said, when you come to your one-on-ones with me and when we talk about things, let's make sure we focus on things that you can control and talk about how I can help you focus on things that you can control. Because I think we have a tendency to like sometimes put our hands in other things that we can't control. And it's one of the things I learned, like, okay, when I'm working with whoever I'm reporting to at the time, like, how do I make sure that I share with them, like, these are the things that I control and this is what I need your help on, right? There are always going to be things that you can't control. And I think bringing some of that drama into things you can't control takes away the focus from you being successful or working on what you should be working on.
Yeah. Yeah, that transparency is really so important because it is so easy, like you said, to just get caught up in the things that are stressing you and draining your energy that you truly can do nothing about. So like, why are you going to worry about it?
Absolutely. There may be systems in place that you don't like or technology in place that you don't like, but how do you adapt to it and learn to live with it if you don't have the ability to change it? I think is important, and using it to the best of your ability, whatever that may be. I think that it's always helpful. And you're really, really spot on with, you may learn things from people that you admired, but they didn't do exactly how you would have. And you're like, okay, when I'm in that position, I'm going to do this, or I'm not going to do that. And those are things, to your point, you learn from things that may have not been great, but you're like, I'm not going to do that when I'm in a particular role, or I have to remember this when I'm working with my team, like this is maybe a different way to approach it.
Yeah. It just kind of gets you a little bit of I think maybe everything's a learning experience. No, no harm, but just maybe I do things a little bit differently.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Sure. So how did the opportunity to become the CEO at National Eczema Association, how did that present itself?
So I was in an interim COO role. I was living in Chicago, and I was working for the American Osteopathic Association, a really fantastic organization that is essentially the organization for doctors of osteopathic medicine. And a recruiter called for a CEO role at the American College of Sports Medicine. And so obviously, with my background, I was really, really excited about that opportunity and went through the process, and was lucky enough to be put in that role, and was in that role for a little over 4 years, and really learned a lot about being a CEO, learned a lot about being a leader. I actually took on that role a month before COVID happened. And so I was the first time. Yeah, I was a first time CEO, had moved from Chicago to Indianapolis. That's where their headquarters were. During that time, I'm like, why am I going through this? This is challenging. This is tough. What's happening? And now 6 years, almost 6 years removed to the date, actually, I'm like, okay, all of those things taught me some things I didn't realize, that the resilience and adapting, and more importantly, rerouting. I think the other thing the pandemic taught a lot of leaders in my role is you have no idea, like there's an unexpected out there, whether it's a loss in revenue or a loss in a product line or a loss in a staff person, and you have to reroute and you have to adapt. So during my time as the CEO of the American College of Sports Medicine, it was very eye-opening, and I learned a ton, and really had the opportunity to hone in on my leadership skills in the right way, and really wanted to get back into understanding and working directly with patients. And so that when the National Eczema Association opportunity was presented to me, um, I'm also a patient and have eczema. So it's something that I dealt with and thankfully very controlled now, but understood what our community is going through. And the dermatology space is pretty great right now. And there's, I'm sure everyone sees skinfluencers and all of these, amazing products that are on the market. And so the space was really interesting to me. But even in addition to that, I just like I did with the American College of Sports Medicine, I really resonated because I understood what patients were going through. And I wanted to work for an organization that had a direct patient impact. When you work in an organization like the American Osteopathic Association or American College of Sports Medicine, you are supporting the members who are supporting patients. It's really cool to be on the patient advocacy side and supporting the patients directly. So it was a shift in what I wasn't normally used to, but I'm so thrilled and happy to be in my role, and it's fun and it's great. And like I said, the dermatology and skin space is pretty interesting right now, and so many really great treatments are on the market. So it's been fun to learn, kind of a different space. So it's been great.
I think it's really cool how you've truly found yourself in a career path that aligns with things that you are passionate about. Like you've had the background of the athlete, so it makes sense for the College of Sports Medicine role.
Yes,
And then same with the National Eczema Association. Like you truly identify with the people that you're trying to serve, which is
absolutely.
so powerful.
It really is. And I think that that's where, empathy and compassion comes into play, right? And I think one of the things that I would say, I think I try, and I think one of the things our organization right now, the National Eczema Association, is doing well, is trying to meet patients where they are, depending on their journey. Some may have really severe atopic dermatitis, some may just have mild, but it is a chronic condition. And how do we help them? Get through things. And it also affects a lot of children, and it has a lot of mental health.
Oh, yeah.
It could have a lot of a lot of effect on mental health. I think obviously skin is the first thing people see, and if someone's not in a good place with that, or they're having a flare up with their eczema, it's hard to go to school, or it's hard to go to work, or it's hard to go on a date, or whatever it may be. And so I think one of the things our organization really tries to do well is meet the patients where they are, depending on what they need, and also advocating for them in regards to access to treatments and access to care. Those things are very important to me too. So yes, you're right. It works out. And I do believe there's some sort of blueprint out there, and sometimes you question it, but I think that you're on the path that you're supposed to be on most of the time.
I agree with that. And sometimes the ones that don't feel like the right path, they're just a redirection or you're learning something that's necessary to help you in the next chapter. So,
Yes, for sure.
Kristin, you're doing amazing work. I mean, I don't identify with the eczema side, but I mean, just you mentioned skin. Like skin is so important. I've struggled with acne in my past
Yep.
and still do. And it really is like you're not just you're helping to change lives and help improve lives. So I think it's amazing.
Thank you. Yes, it's interesting. I had the opportunity to do an interview with Time, and the reporter was asking me a little bit about, to your point that, and he's like, well, I had acne. I was like, it's the same thing, right? It's still like overcoming something that is very visible for people. If you have a different chronic condition that people can't see, sometimes that's hard, but something that's visible like that is hard. And I think, especially when it's like a pediatric demographic, or kids and
Oh, yeah.
children and young adults, it's not fun at all. So yeah, it's fun. It's a disease and a condition, I think, that's misunderstood. And so I was really drawn to like the science, the advocacy, and the lived experience. And we're at a really cool place in the treatment space that there's a lot of meaningful work being done, which is fun.
Yeah. I love that you found yourself like as I mentioned before, like the mission driven lane. And I know a lot of a lot of young candidates or like people that are new to the job market, or just even anyone that's just still in their career searching for something that they identify with, that they feel really passionate about, how would you encourage them to try to find that space or to get their foot in the door in a space that they're really passionate about?
I think one of the things that is really important, and I think it's shifted quite a bit, and people always talk about networking and connecting with other people, but I do think a lot of times, you're in your early 20s and you're earlier in your career. People like me, my age, we love to talk to people that are like early in their career and provide guidance or support or feedback. And so I think if there's something you're interested in, like I have no idea about this, but now with LinkedIn and all of these other networking platforms, I think reaching out to them and saying, hey, can you tell me more about it? What do you like about your role? What do you not like about your role? But I also think it's really honing in on what you realize you're good at, and in our case, or in the case of athletes, it is being part of a team, and it's leading a team, and it's you know driving forward when you may have a bad practice or a bad day, and now it's more of a bad quarter or a bad month or whatever it may be. And so I think there's that resilience piece that a lot of athletes can associate with. But I think if I were to give advice, it would be think about what you really like. And like when you're going through your workday, like what makes you most happy? Is it when you're presenting? Is it when you're talking to someone trying to sell something? Is it when you're doing writing or, communicating? And I think if you hone in on that and you can learn what you feel good about and what you like, I think you're able to fall into it in the right way.
I love it. I absolutely love it. That's such great advice. And if I could add one thing, it's
Yes, please.
that you and I met through Launch Break. So,
Yes.
like you mentioned, networking early on in that answer, and I think that has been the most beneficial to me because it's been like targeted
Yeah.
networking with other female athletes who want to meet other female athletes who are doing cool stuff in their career and want to help each other out. And I think people will say, you got to network. But I think it really makes the most impact when you find almost that niche where you're like, wow, these people have the same values as me. And then
Absolutely.
the conversations really start flowing and becoming meaningful, just like we were able to
Absolutely.
connect.
Yeah, no, and they evolve. And I think Launch Break, it's been really interesting. And I have to say, I think the organization is doing a fantastic job, to your point, in a market that I don't think there was anything, right? So I think the founders really did a good job of creating this community. And I'm extremely impressed at the number of like recent graduates that are on there, like, hey, I'm interested in this, or I'm interested in this, or I'm going down. There was someone on there. I'm going down, starting my residency in sports medicine. Like, can you connect me with people? And so I think the platform has really allowed a lot of individuals, especially early and later in their career, to have a connection to something that's important to them. And I think it is a very, very cool space that's different than anything else that's out there right now.
Yeah, totally agree. I totally agree. I am so impressed with the new grads because I look back at my time when I graduated. I mean, I wasn't doing that. I was like, but it would have been so helpful because I really struggled with my transition out of uniform, had no idea what I wanted to do afterwards. And if I would have had maybe a group like that to at least be like, I don't know what I like, but this is what I studied. I'd like to have some conversations with people, maybe learn about your career. I think that would have been so helpful because there just was nothing like that, to your point, to help us.
No, and it's interesting. I have a staff member on my team that actually was a swimmer at Syracuse, and I told her about it, and I hope she's investigating it because it is different. And she's a working mom, and she's really growing in her career. And I was like, there's some really really cool things in here that that you may be interested in, and connecting with people that have the same passions as you do. I will absolutely stand by this, that if you were performing and competing at a high level in any sport or in anything that's really important, I think having a network that you can go to and talk to those people is, are important. But I think it's also about people, to your point, can empathize and understand what you're going through. You had mentioned having a hard time transitioning and trying to find what you're passionate about. And until it kind of goes like until you're in it, you don't realize it. And having that network of people that's there is fantastic.
100%. Kristin, this has been such a fun conversation. It's been great to have you here. I know we're short on time, so I just have
Yes,
one
thank
final
you.
question to ask you before we end. What does changing the game mean to you?
I think changing the game for me means um, it's not only shifting optics, it's shifting systems, right? And addressing structural barriers, whether it's a structural barrier with you or in a career or in a work environment. And I think change is also incremental. So I think that incremental improvement is really critical. So changing the game for me is really focusing on that incremental improvement. I think a lot of times we, as retired athletes, have a tendency to want to shoot for the stars, which is fantastic. I think at certain points in our career, incremental growth and incremental improvement is still changing the game, right? Like I think we need to remind ourselves about that. And when you're going through something, you're still building something. It may not be exactly where it needs to be, but there's still a finish line, but even small improvements are getting you there. And I think in a career, that's sometimes forgotten. And especially for people like us that have a tendency to be extremely driven, that incremental improvement is changing the game and you're making an impact.
One thing I could definitely learn to implement a little bit better. So
Me too. I trust me. Like my team's gonna be like, "What did she say, Kristin?"
I'm going to be like, yeah, let's all take a learning moment from that one.
or I also like progress over perfection too. I think that's really important as well, and especially in a work environment where you may not have the ability to control everything, that progress is better than perfection a lot of times.
100%. Kristin, thank you so much for being here today. Where can our listeners find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Kristin Belleson, Belleson. I do a little bit of Facebook, not too much Instagram. I need to get active in TikTok because of those skinfluencers.
Yeah.
You can also email me. I'll give you my work email address, Kristin, because it's easy, Kristin at National Eczema. Eczema is ECZEMA.org. And, but LinkedIn's a great way. And for Launch Break, through Launch Break too.
Launch Break. Yes. Yes. Any female athletes listening, definitely check out Launch Break.
Please.
So
yeah, it's fantastic.
Thank you so much, Kristin. So generous of your time. I really appreciate it. And I hope we can stay connected.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jordan. Good luck.